Today, here all is quiet.
All is peaceful.
And all is well.
But that is only true in our broadcasting station.
Welcome to the Secret Truth Radio. This is Michael Metcalf.
This is Griffin Hurley.
This is Leif Gershberg.
And this is George Wren. Exactly 10 years ago, in October of 1929, the stock market crashed. This crash was no ordinary one either. The stock prices dropped to only 20% of their value in only 3 years. Along with several other factors, the crash heralded in an era of economic and political instability. And so, the Great Depression started. Only now are we starting to recover from this worldwide disaster. Let's take this time to review this monumental catastrophe from the beginning to the end. The Great Depression, the longest, the severest, and most tragic economic recession yet, has caused more than just hunger and sadness. It has brought new governments to form in nations and caused staggering unemployment rates. What exactly could have caused this immense tragedy? October 1929. The Roaring Twenties was reaching its end in the United States, and people were as optimistic as ever. Up to this point, stock prices have been generally continuously rising, seemingly to no end. October 1929. Stock prices started their gradual decline and created panic within this nation. October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday. From then on, conditions only became worse and worse. Stocks were sold at record rates, prices declined rapidly, and morale decreased. With less wealth, consumers bought less, and as a result, production slowed down. It seemed only natural for calamity to ensue. With the stock market crash, the confidence in banks was lost. The people demanded cash, and that was what banks supplied. But the only way to get anywhere near the amount of cash that people wanted was to liquidate loans. The unfortunate downside of this was that many banks were brought to bankruptcy and failure. No banks, no loans, and no investments. With the lowered capability to receive loans to start up businesses and to finance projects, there was little to boost the economy. This was not only happening in the United States of America, but all around the world. The lending of money to foreign nations was another step that led to the Great Depression. Having paid high expenses to fund World War I, many European nations were in desperate need of money. The United States easily lent money to these nations. The substantial amount of money lent was an effort to help the nations recover. However, with the stock market crash and subsequent events, the flow of money to Europe slowed dramatically. With no more outside funding, many countries' production also slowed down. Later, after the United States passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff with intentions to protect agriculture from competition, European nations responded with their own policies. From these restrictive policies, international trade greatly decreased, leading to further deflation.
Part of the blame can also be put on Federal Reserve as well. It went to much extent to implement restrictive monetary policies to preserve the gold standard. Prior, with the United States as a central market, much of the world's gold flowed to the U.S. As prices dropped, banks raised their interest rates to prevent gold outflow. In order to keep the gold standard, there were many international monetary contractions to match the gold deflation in the United States. Essentially, the gold standard made the nations deflate to prevent all the international gold from collecting in the United States. To do so, whenever the United States deflated, the other countries had to follow suit. We will now interrupt briefly with a quick message from our sponsors.
Coca-Cola! When you look hot, feel hot, and are hot, grab an ice-cold Coca-Cola. It tingles with deliciousness. Don't fight the urge. Quench the thirst. Grab a box of Coca-Cola at your neighborhood market. Coca-Cola is not responsible for the possible harmful effects of their product.
And so the Great Depression started. With less production in many countries, two of the most prevalent effects were unemployment and inflation. In the United States, maintenance of the gold standard had a sure effect on this. The increased production of money could not be backed by the gold, and as a result, the currency's value decreased drastically. To provide some specifics, here are some statistics from the last decade. The deflation rates: 1930, 3.96%, 1931, 10%, and 1932, 11.38%. As for unemployment, they have not doubled, not even tripled. In 1921, they were merely 3.14%. In just 1 year, they doubled to 8.67%. In 1931, 15.82%. In 1932, 23.57%. And finally, in 1933, they were a staggering 24.75%. One of the immediate effects of the Great Depression was protective policies. With the intention to sustain their own economy, many nations imposed tariffs to protect themselves from competition. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff, passed in 1930, raised protective tariffs in the U.S. by drastic proportions. In retaliation, many countries instituted similar tariffs against U.S. goods, and international trade decreased by a shocking 30%. While increased international trade may have helped promote recovery, the exact opposite occurred. Many European governments responded by cutting public spending as well as the wages of government-employed workers. As time progressed, there were elections of Democratic and Labor governments. In the United States, President Hoover used the aforementioned tariff to protect low-priced imports, but it was only for companies that maintained wages. The only alternative to cutting wages was cutting workers, and many people lost their jobs as a result. Taxes were increased in all countries, but once again the U.S. responded with more extreme measures. The Revenue Act of 1932 was one of the greatest increases in taxation during peacetime. The tax rate on people with the highest incomes rose from 25% to 63%. In contrast, the one thing that decreased across the board was the interest rates on loans. Governments thought this would encourage industries to borrow money and increase their productivity. In the United States, one of the main events during the Great Depression was the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt over Hoover. He instituted the New Deal, a series of plans to promote more government regulation and create more public works projects. One such production was the Hoover Dam. Due to the fact that many regulation agencies were created during Roosevelt's presidency, together the programs are called alphabet soup. They ranged from SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, to PWA, Public Works Administration, to NLRB, National Labor Relations Board. And now a word from Old Spice.
Old Spice. The power of Old Spice. Feel it. Sense it. The power of Old Spice. The mark of a manly man. You will find yourself, your true self, in Old Spice. Spice up your life. Old Spice.
And now we're back. The French were affected less by the Great Depression and did little to combat it. France's economy was mostly agrarian, which made them more self-sufficient and less dependent on trade. This sheltered them from the worst of the Depression, but also made them slow in responding. France imposed high tariffs and exempted many farmers from paying taxes. Wages of workers were also increased, and a public works program was adopted. Although it was partially in response to workers' strikes rather than the Depression. Despite this, there were still many unemployed workers in France. Germany was perhaps hit the hardest by the Depression because of the reparations they were expected to pay. However, as the European countries no longer had financial support from the United States, they had no money to pay the reparations. Therefore, the United States kindly created the moratorium that dropped all international debts. The tariffs prevented German industries from making a profit by exporting goods in German money, was worthless to the point that they couldn't sell any products within their own country. The economy only began to improve as Hitler prepared for war and increased the production of armaments. The reason why Great Britain was not hit as hard was because they were the first country to get out of the gold standard. As a result, this caused their currency to drop, causing their exports to cost less. This gave Great Britain a competitive edge in the economy. As a result, this caused their unemployment to decrease due to the demand for their cheaper goods, which as a result caused them to get out of the Great Depression the fastest. Now we pause for a word from Wonder Bread.
Wonder Bread, the most wonderful bread of all. Make a wonderful decision today. Buy some Wonder Bread. It does wonders.
In addition to higher unemployment rates and inflation, much political instability was caused. Economic difficulties led to many different forms of government changes. In Brazil, low coffee prices by economic collapse followed by a revolution in 1930. There was also a revolution in Argentina, along with the assassination of President Alvaro Obregón in Mexico in 1928. The Japanese premier Osachi Hamaguchi was killed in 1930. The Spanish king Alfonso VIII went into exile in 1931. Two of the most influential economists of the Great Depression era were John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich von Hayek. These two well-known economists held very different views on the economics of a country. To understand how each of these men influenced the world, we must first understand the cycle of economics over the past 10 years. During the past decade, there has been a boom and bust cycle. After the war, a surplus of wealth was held in the United States. After the stock market crashed, the people of the world were looking for answers, and this is when the economics became very important. John Maynard Keynes was well known throughout this past decade for creating an economic model capable of lasting for a very long time. Keynes' economic model is based on government spending. He believes that the government must spend money on public projects, thus creating circular flow throughout the government and country. With the flow of money comes lower interest rates, and with these lower interest rates comes the borrowing of money from banks. People in this economic concept borrow money from banks to fund projects, and this circular flow is constant throughout. Although, another point John Maynard Keynes makes in this is to increase aggregate demand. This adds more money to the cash flow that is ever apparent. Economists that thought differently from the economics that Keynes brought forward is Friedrich von Hayek. Hayek is a well-known political figure, psychology thinker, and economic genius. Friedrich was an advocate for Austrian economics. These Austrian ideas are what make Hayek a much different economist than Keynes. He believes that the government should stay out of the economy. The only time they should intervene is to protect the poor. The extremely poor were taken advantage of throughout these past 10 years. Hayek believes that the boom and bust cycle that preceded the Great Depression can be completely avoided. Friedrich understands that the bust part of the cycle should not be feared, but the boom part of the cycle should be. Hayek wants to keep the interest rates high and stable, causing the people of the country to save their money. Saving is the backbone of Austrian economics. Hayek does not believe that the ideas of Keynes are good because he thinks that the constant spending will cause high inflation. The high inflation will cause the governments to cripple, and the markets of that government and country will be destroyed. John Maynard Keynes influenced the ideas of governments from the United States of America to Europe. His principles were widely accepted throughout the countries of Great Britain and France. The ideas of Hayek are not as widely accepted, but are often used by governments and individuals looking to follow a more conservative path of economics. These two economists hold very different opinions on how a country's economics should be. These economists changed the minds of millions in the Great Depression era.
The Great Depression.
It led to many reforms,
including more government regulation on the economy.
This is Michael Metcalf,
Griffin Hurley,
Lee Skirchberg,
George Wren,
signing off from the Secret Truth Radio. You are the weakest link. Goodbye.